Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
I am Troy Edgar, and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I met with Tod Neal, U.S. Navy Master Explosive Ordinance Disposal Operator from San Diego, California. We had a fascinating discussion about Navy Special Operations, his decorated military career, and helping veterans transition from the military to the commercial sector. Tod is a true American hero. After growing up in a youth home in Louisiana, Tod forged his own way and recently retired from the Navy after a 30-year career. During that time, he completed 10 deployments, 6 combat tours, diffused over 360 IEDs, directly served 3 U.S. presidents, and completed over 562 combat missions accompanying the Navy SEALs and the Army Special Forces. He's earned over 20 awards and accommodations, including 3 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the elite Navy and Marine Corp Medal for heroism. I met Tod earlier this year at the University of Southern California, where I support and mentor veterans in transition at the Marshall School of Business. My goal today is to encourage more employers to carefully evaluate and value military experience. I believe our veterans deserve our help. I hope you enjoy. All right, good afternoon, Tod. It's good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you too, Troy.
Yeah, it's awesome that I really appreciate you coming in here. Today, we've got Master Explosive Ordinance Disposal Operator Tod Neal, and also a recent graduate of the MBA School for Veterans, the program that they put together for veterans up at the University of Southern California. And I'm just very proud to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's very humbling to be here, Troy, and thank you. Great.
What I'm going to do, Tod, is wanted to talk a little bit about your background. And, you recently retired from the military. You've done 30 years of service to our country. And then as you got ready to get out of the military, you ended up through the transition process at USC. And that's where you and I ended up connecting, and as a part of the Capstone Project and as a board member up there to be able to be a part of this. It's my honor to work with folks like yourself to be able to make that transition from military into commercial potential areas of opportunity. And, and then at this point, what we'd hope today, you and I have been talking about this, is we think that the process that you've been going through and your career is really interesting. We just together want to try to help other veterans that are out there that are making this transition. And so again, I really appreciate it. I know our listeners are really going to appreciate this time with you today. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, Tod, step back a little bit, walk people through your history and kind of give an idea or the perspective of really kind of where you started, to really give an idea that like not everybody starts at the same place.
Well, that's an understatement, that's for sure. In my case, I grew up in Ruston, Louisiana at the Methodist Children's Home. Was never adopted or went into foster care or anything like that. And wasn't the best student when I was younger. But somewhere along the line, I had a worker there that kind of taught me how to win, right? Like got into running and doing running races and started winning those and realized how good it felt to work for something and achieve it. But after that, I focused on school more and tried to make up the 2 years that that I had lost, right? Because I got held back for 2 years. And in that time, everything was on track. I had watched the movie Top Gun.
We all did.
Right? Like I was like, I'm going to be a pilot, right? And I'm like going to go out and join the Navy. And had figured out how to get into the Naval Academy and was going to do all that. And my plan was perfect. And then the Methodist Children's Home Education Director came to me one day and said, hey, you're coming up on your 18th birthday, but you're not due to graduate for 2 years after. Don't worry about it. Things will be fine. And I was like, okay, cool. That's awesome. And I don't know, a couple of weeks later, he comes back to me and goes, yeah, the board met. We keep no one after the age of 18. And I panicked. I was like, I'm going to find myself on the street. There was no halfway homes back then. It was kind of like you were either in the home or you were out of it. And so I panicked and didn't know what I was going to do. Like, am I going to find myself on the street? How will I finish my own going to high school? How's everything fit in? And the director came back to me and says, we have a plan. And I was like, okay, what is it? And he's like, okay, you're going to drop out of school. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good plan. And I was like, I'm young, but I don't think that's it. And he goes, no. He's like, you're going to drop out of school and you're going to get your GED. And I'm like, still not a good plan. And he goes, well, you're going to do that. And then you're going to take the entrance exam for Louisiana Tech University. And you're going to, and I think you can get in. You're smart. I was like, okay, all right. Sounds like a plan. I'm gonna have to rethink Naval Academy and being a pilot and all that. I think that's off the table now. And next thing you know, within a 6-month time span, I went from being a sophomore in high school to being a freshman in college.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then as you're in college, what inspired you at that point to then make the move fully into the Navy?
Well, one thing I underestimated was at the children's home was a lot like the military, very regimented.
Yeah, institutional.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when I didn't have that anymore, like someone telling me, that whole adage of when a kid becomes an adult, now you have to have the skills to tell yourself to do the things your parents used to do, even though we had house parents, but there was no one there to tell me to study and do all these great things. And, so I kind of I didn't have those right and left limits. So I kind of my performance lacked and I couldn't understand it. And I was working full time to pay for school and as well as, just working, going to school, and trying to support myself, right? And grades lacked. So I was like, I'm going in the Navy. I'm not going in as a pilot, so what I'll do is I'll go in, I'll do 4 years, I'll get some money, I'll come back and do this right. I'll go to school, be able to focus on school, get some discipline while I'm in school, in the Navy. And I went and joined the Navy, and they decided to put me in Hawaii, which was terrible, by the way. As a young guy, terrible.
Oh, yeah.
And, to quote a Forrest Gump line, we were like peas and carrots. Like, I was like, hey, this is great. Because it's a organization that rewards good behavior and accomplishment. So as long as you accomplish, you're rewarded and you're promoted. And if you don't do those things, well, you wind up just moving on to something else. Yeah,
it's very merit-based. And again, kind of back to the theme of this podcast, a meritocracy. It definitely, you have to achieve things and you're rewarded by new rank and grade as you move your way through that. So you're in the Navy and the part of the career that I think the listeners will find very fascinating is your move from standard Navy to going into explosive ordnance disposal. And I will just say, Todd, being a previous Navy guy myself, I'm in very much allure of that decision point that you had. I was in submarines, and you go to sub school, and again, all credentials, right? You go through that, then you end up in you go into the fleet. There's a moment in the fleet. I was also first stationed in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor, and there was a lot of focus on, hey, they need people to go to dive school so you can actually go and when the subs pull into port, somebody's got to go and do some stuff underneath the sub and around the port there, more maintenance stuff. But so a lot of people, when they first get there, they're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go to dive school. And then people start getting really full of it and they're like, hey, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And then they hear a Navy SEAL EOD or what you were in. And as a non-person in your environment, but a submariner, EOD was something that was commensurate because you and the Navy SEALs would go places together. And my duty station in Hawaii was on a submarine that was actually a special ops sub that carried the SEALs out. So it was kind of a mixed crew, if you know what I mean. And so we would go out, they would go do stuff. They kind of get launched in the middle of wherever we were at. And then they would come back and we'd come back, and so a lot of stuff would happen. But so we'd hear some of the stories, but the skill sets that you guys had were the more technical engineering of the operation once they get to where they have to do things. So anyway, the reason why I wanted that set up is, can you tell the listeners a little bit and educate them about EOD, what you went through training wise, and when you kind of get hatched into the fleet, as they call it.
Yeah. So joining Navy EOD. So of course, just like the SEALs, it has its minimum physical requirements. You have to swim, so far, so fast, have to run so far, so fast, do so many pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, right? That just gets you a ticket to the show. But what they tell you is they keep metrics. It's almost like a professional, athletics club or anything. They're kind of like, if you're not within this area, you don't even get a ticket to the game. And so you have to be competitive. And so just doing 50 push-ups, you're probably not getting there. You're trying to max out for 2 minutes, as many as you can do. And just so you get an opportunity. Now, for Navy EOD, the first thing you do is you go to dive school, and that's where the first selection or weeding out process happens. You find out real fast who's comfortable in the water and who is not comfortable in the water. And, anything from snorkel exercises, over and unders, where you will just go up and over constantly through the pool, and you don't get a lot of chances to get a breath of air. So you not having air, of course, freaks a lot of people out, as it should. But then once you've done your pool work and you've shown you're competent, then you start learning how to put on scuba equipment and get into the pool. And there's a part of training that kind of ends that phase, and it's called hits. And it's exactly like the word says. You swim along the bottom of the pool, within like a foot of it, and the instructors shark you from top side. They don't have scuba on; they have to do it on a breath hold, and they will come down and they will rip your mask off. They will turn your air off. They will undo your straps and try to take your scuba jugs away from you. They'll rip your regulator out of your mouth, tie it into a knot, cram it between your doubles, because you use double scuba bottles at dive school, and then they let you go. Now, if you panic and bolt to the surface, you're done with the course. You have to compose yourself, slow down, and start unraveling the problem, and get back to the point where you're operationally capable again to start swimming again, because it's not a one-time deal, on the pool deck. And then you will come back and you'll do it again, but you'll do it as a buddy pair. And usually one of them will lose their scuba tanks, and now you're buddy breathing. So you're learning how to, one, be very calm in very stressful situations, And then the second part is stressful situation, being calm, but learning how to work as a team to survive. Then after that, you move on to mixed gas breathers, which allows us to dive to really deep depths on mixed gas. And from there, you go to Eglin Air Force Base, is where the Navy's EOD school is. Navy EOD does in total about a year of all the training, year and a half. But there at Navy EOD school, we go through all the phases where it's like just basic ground ordnance identification. You learn basic demolitions using C4 and TNT safely. Then you'll go to Chem Biological Weapons Division. You'll learn tools and techniques. And you'll go to IED Division as well, learning how to deal with improvised devices as well as booby traps. And then after that, you'll move on to Nuke Division, where you'll learn about nuclear weapons. And one interesting fact about Navy EOD techs, well, all EOD techs, is that we hold what's called CNWITI. We hold critical nuclear design information. We know, or the privileged few that know exactly how the inner workings of a nuclear device works. And because you kind of have to know that to be able to defuse them. And so for Navy, we have two more phases, which is Area 8, which is a classified section. And then we go to underwater, where we reiterate all the skills we've learned, but we're just doing them underwater. We will then go to Fort Benning and just become static line jump qualified. And then we'll move on to military free fall, where we will become HALO or HAHO, high altitude, high opening qualified, be able to jump from 6 miles above the earth on oxygen into a target or something like that. Then you go to San Diego to do tactical training, where you'll learn all your comms, your navigations, some rudimentary weapon skills, as well as room clearance. By about that time, we've lost probably 80% of the people you started with.
Wow. So when you get done through that whole process, in submarines, they have a kind of a badge or a pin, is the dolphins. Can you talk about the what denotes when somebody gets through the EOD process?
Well, when you're done with the EOD school, you're awarded the EOD badge, which amongst EOD techs, we call it the crab.
Yeah, and then that process kind of goes on through your whole career. Yeah. For the listeners, talk a little bit about just to drive the point home of you are a true American hero, 30 years with the Navy, and just that level of service and being able to kind of go through different parts of that. Just briefly, like a highlight or a little bit of a flyby of maybe an interesting duty station or operation. Because what I'd like to do now is, you've talked about what makes up the basics of becoming an EOD. Talk about the job in the context of maybe, to give people a little bit of a vision of what it does in real time.
Okay, well, by the time I was done with schooling, we had the events of 9/11 that had happened. And my second deployment, which is probably my first deployment was with SEAL Team 7. And then my second deployment was to Fallujah, Iraq, in early 2005. And I can still remember flying there, and this was like, okay, this is the real deal here. Like, this is Fallujah. Like, this is, like, you hear about this on the news all the time, how what a hotbed of insurgency it was and how dangerous it was. And with the SEAL teams, I did a lot of raids, didn't do a lot of EOD work per se. I was looking for boot traps for them. But here, I was straight up doing, or going to do IEDs, at least one.
Yeah.
And I remember we flew in, and immediately our team was split in half. Half of us went to Ramadi, half of us went to Fallujah, and I went to Fallujah. And they needed volunteers to go to an outpost that was literally in the center of the city of Fallujah. It's called the Mayor's Cell. And I was like, oh, new. I joined up as a volunteer. I volunteer. I'll go. And I remember that it was me and my senior chief. We got there. We got a couple hours of sleep. We got our first call. I was like, okay, here we go. We rolled out and we were going down the highway. I think it was Route Michigan. And I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I remember looking over. We would drive in the middle of the freeway, to give ourselves, because, dirt bad, because they can bury IEDs there and you can't see them. And I remember looking, and I was like, oh, look, there's a burlap bag on the side of the road there. And then, as soon as I got the thought through my mind, my windshield was cracked. There was dust. A detonation had happened, right? Hit on my side of the vehicle. We stopped. We tried to find the trigger man. We couldn't find him. We did a post-blast analysis, collected evidence, and that's a part of our job that a lot of people don't know. We kind of like CSI as well. We collect evidence to determine, bombers and materials and things like that. Get back in the truck, and we move on to Sacagawea, Iraq, and to just do a weapons cache that another force had found to destroy, explosive hazards so they couldn't fall into wrong hands and be used by the insurgency against coalition forces. Well, from that call, we had another call and another call and another call and another. It just went on and on and on. And the next day we got back. We went from IED call to IED call. And it was just, the work was there was so much work there. It was teams, our cordon teams that found it would be on site for hours waiting for us to show up. Wow. Well, once we got back, I had time to process, and I was like, wow, I've been here 24 hours now, and I've been blown up already. I was like, I'm probably not making it through this deployment. If that's the
odds of that whole trip,
right.
That's a good statistic, yeah.
Yeah, the intensity of it all. And I kind of went, well, I'll do what I can while I'm here. I will keep the guy to the right and left of me alive, and we'll just handle it a day at a time. And so we did our next response up to the northwest corner of Fallujah. And on our way back, a group of Marines flagged us down. They were foot patrol. They were squad. And but we got stopped because we had a 50 cal on one of our trucks, and they needed it. Come to find out, they had two Marines that had been shot. Surgeons were in opposing buildings. The two Marines were on the other side of the berm. We couldn't see them, and they were about to be reinforced by another squad of Marines. And they just needed us to stay. And we're like, absolutely, we'll stay. Well, next radio call is the other squad of Marines are pinned down. They're not making it. We don't know when they're going to arrive to your site. And I remember my buddy, Brian, he looked at me and he goes, all right, there's two different enemy emplacements, 180 out from them. If we go down there, try to get the Marines, we'll just be mowed down. And I was like, okay. And he's like, and at this point, we had destroyed a lot of buildings. If the enemy used it for insurgency, we would destroy the tool and take it away from them. So we got pretty good at imploding buildings in on themselves. And he kind of looked at me and goes, you got that bag full of frag grenades? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, I have an idea. He goes, okay, we're gonna move real quick from here to there. I'm gonna use the cover of darkness as, to try to give us some cover, but we don't have much. And but we're going to throw a grenade and move, because we don't have time to be held up, because we'd be held up in the open, and they would have a clear line to hit us. And he goes, we'll get inside the building, we'll take 2 satchels of C4, we'll implode the building with the insurgents in the building. I was like, okay, sounds like a plan. I'm not sure it's a good plan, but it's a plan. And so we make our way, and I'll caveat this with throwing your first hand grenade probably shouldn't be in combat. Like, because I remember throwing that first grenade, and it's amazing what experiences like that do to you with your perception of time. Because I threw it, and I was like, and I waited. My buddy Brian waited. He looked at me, and he's like, did you pull the pin? And I was like, man, I don't know. And I kind of did this motion of like, I don't know. And the pin was still on my finger. I was like, yep, I pulled it. And he kind of like looked at me. I laughed, and he wasn't laughing for some odd reason. And then the grenade went, as it should. And then after that, every grenade went as you would expect them to go. So we get inside the building, and he's holding security on the stairwell to keep the insurgents that were on the roof from coming down. And I don't think they saw us make it into the building. Well, when I pulled out the time fuse from the bags, I realized that he had grabbed the short time fuse. Now, time fuse is kind of like wild, for people listening, like Wild E. Coyote. It's black powder. You pop it, and it only burns at a certain speed. Well, I pull this out, and I'm like, oh my God, like how much time do we have? A minute? 45 seconds. Maybe a minute and 30. And I was like, I looked at him, and I was like, are you kidding me? And he goes, can you make it work? So I'm sitting here doing the calculation. I'm like, pillar, okay, pop smoke, run this, pop smoke. I probably lost 15 seconds. I can't lose 15 seconds. And so I pulled the bags. I was like, I have a plan. So I was like, when I say it's time to go, we have to run. And so we pop smoke, and I put both hands in the igniters, and I pulled, hoping I'd get smoke on both igniter. And that's what, starts the powder time train. Luckily, I did get smoke on both, and I was able to slide the satchel C to one column, the other one, and then we just ran. And we made it maybe halfway to the truck, and the building detonated, and thank goodness for body armor, because, cinder blocks were hitting us in the back. Then all of a sudden, we didn't know where we were running, and we just decided to stop running, because we didn't know if we were running toward the other enemy emplacement. So we stopped, and we waited for the dust to settle. Well, once the dust settled enough, kind of poked our heads up to see where we were at. And it was good that we did stop running, because we did lag to the right, and running toward the other enemy emplacement. But what worked out better was the 2 wounded Marines were right there. Wow. So we're like, oh, opportunity. So we grabbed them as the 50 cal shooting rounds over our head, rocking the building, and we get them back. Medevac was going to take a while. So we were like, hey, single vehicle movement to Mech Fallujah, drove these 2 Marines back, dropped them off at Fallujah Surgical. Our convoy commander was like, hey, we've got 3 calls. So we just dropped them off and rolled on. So
yeah, that, like you said, statistically, going through that type of activity day in, day out for a period of time, and I'll go back to, you did 30 years in the service, so definitely tough duty. As you were going through the military and you start to get towards the end of your career, and you start looking ahead of, hey, like you said, the way the military is structured, as you and I both know, is you can either self-select out when you're done, and that would be more where my path was, or you can keep going towards a retirement until you can no longer be promoted, and then they stop the game for you. And so you're hitting 30 years. Summarize a little bit your career, because what I want to do is I want to take the listeners now into this important part of the transition. Here's a very stimulating career, and all of the stuff that you've done, but I think it's important to kind of now note what 30 years does.
Right. I think there's and some misnomers out there as well, is that every day of a military person's life is like the story I just told. It's not like that. There are, as you get more senior, there are more administrative things you have to do, and a lot of those administrative things are directly relatable to what civilians do in civilian jobs. As I moved on in my career, toward the end, I was moved in, and looking back, a military person is like a generalist, and I almost say a civilian's like a specialist in their field. And I say a generalist because a military individual, most part, never gets to choose the job they get. They just get put into it, and they have to be successful at it. And you learn certain soft core skills that you use that make you successful, no matter whether you're working in admin as the department head, or you're running a platoon, or you're a current operations officer. For me, at the end, I worked in our requirements department, which is a lot of program management. We are the warfighters say they need a capability, and we determine what is available in the civilian sector to fill that capability gap. And if there's not one, then the military creates it. So they create the widget. So it's a lot of program management, a lot of budgets and making sure budgets stay on track. You have to be able to swing from battery technology to robotics, all within a one day. All the fields that I got to cover, and it's really rewarding because, UAV systems, unmanned underwater systems, new weapon systems, new vehicles, having to deal with, like I said, battery technology. Do we do lithium ion? Do we do nickel metal hydride? New robotics, how many arms and manipulations does it need to do? Our UAV systems, do they need to carry cargo? How big is that cargo? Working with the manufacturers and trying to bring these items to market or to the military in a timely manner.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you and I end up kind of intercepting because when I ended up coming into contact with you was at USC. So you've gotten out, you did your 30 years. You're now kind of in a transition. And, I remember, the day I got to meet that class and being able to kind of get an idea, and everybody stands up and introduces themselves. And then, talking to you kind of after and maybe, the feeling maybe of being in the Navy was kind of interesting. But I mean, I remember, talking about, how many different deployments you'd been on and some of the wars, Navy and Marine the Navy and Marine Corp Medal, one of the highest honored medals that you can get, 3 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor. I mean, definitely impressive, but yet you're in a different field now. Now we're in a room full of other veterans, and you've got people that have similar stories to you, but in different services. And it's funny is that I think what stood out with you when I was talking to you at the very beginning was everything that you talked about at the very end of your career is what I saw. We ended up coming in, setting up a capstone project. You basically were one of 4 teams. They nominate you to be the leader and for your team. And by the way, your team won. and it was, but it was a lot about program management and leadership. And, so I think in the end, all of the experiences that you had, from very technical to be able to kind of move it into that direction. But I think what's hard is, and I see this a lot, through the different cohorts that work their way through USC or any veterans program. I do stuff too with Syracuse and in Washington, D.C. with a lot of the vet groups, is that you have people that have skill sets that are just unbelievable, but it's hard for them to either have the confidence to know how to navigate that into the corporate world to kind of, quote, resell themselves. And it really takes a discussion or somebody like myself that kind of came up through that and realizes, like, people have no idea all the skills you guys have. And so, talk a little bit, because I want to talk about your transition. I want to talk about the time that while you were kind of going through that process, trying to, and think about this, everybody. I mean, you heard the story. This guy, Tod, you come from a children's home, and now you've already accomplished, your bachelor's degree. You're at one of the top 20 MBA programs in the nation at USC. And then you come into the Capstone Project, and you basically lead your team to victory through that. And by the way, all the other 3 teams were equally as awesome. Absolutely. I mean, it was the toughest part. I mean, we had executives come in from IBM to try to judge it, and it was like trying to pick the Pope, right? They just couldn't get the smoke to come up out of the room. But anyway, talk about like your experience there, your mindset, and what was the feeling, maybe even with your other veteran colleagues as you're going through?
I make things very, I try to get them down to their bare essentials. And you can know all the technology in the world, you can know a lot of things, but there are people, you need people to do those things. And if you can understand the people, because the people are the real asset. On every platoon I was on, all those incredible things didn't happen on their own. They happened because of the people. And on an EOD team, what is interesting is that even though you may be a team leader and you're like, okay, we're going to handle this problem this way, you'll canvas. And sometimes the youngest guy there, it's his first deployment, will have the best idea because he's not indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, hey, that's a great idea. We're going with that. Well, now he feels empowered because you went with his idea, right? You went with his idea because it was a great idea. Mm-hmm. And once you breed that, then guys will bring up things, and they will talk about things. And okay, I knew that worked in the military, and that works within EOD. Guys are passionate. They'll argue their point, but they're not so stubborn. They won't go, you know what, that's a better one. Mm-hmm. But you get some really magical things that happen. Well, here I am with special operations people. Will it work here? And those basic things of, setting ground rules, business rules, like, hey, this is how we will perform, and getting buy-in from everyone. So it's not just one person dictating the rules. It's everybody's got buy-in, so they feel like they're a part of the process. And then you identify what capabilities, what strengths people have. And what's awesome is those people who don't realize they have a strength, and you identify it, and the looks on their faces when they realize what they have just done with the capability that they didn't have. And we had no intent to win, honestly. Mm-hmm. One of the rules was, let's just have a great time and just be better than we were yesterday. Mm-hmm. If we could just do that, we have won.
Well, let's talk about the very, very end. So, when that's over, now it's quite an accomplishment. Again, through merit, you guys get a qualification called the master's degree there, and you're kind of unleashed. And I think as a mentor that works with a lot of veterans, I really feel like, and a lot of people say, hey, I want to help the veterans. A lot of people say that, but it's the follow through and to be able to go through. And you and I, even after, we met outside and we talked about the different career paths, and, we kind of laid it out and said, and I know you probably remember over our coffee discussions, but it was, there's different types of transitions. You can go to a brand new career, and, obviously, selfishly, I want to see if I can pull people into the consulting profession or into a corporate job. I have a lot of Fortune 500 relationships, and I'm in a federal position. And so I know a lot of area of opportunity, but it's interesting. The parallels between consulting and being in a platoon is, you're basically set out away from your company. You get embedded into a different company, and you basically have, everybody's got a specialty. There's a program leader and an executive, and it's very similar as what a very high performing team does in consulting is they listen to someone that's a college grad to the most seasoned person there, and we try to come up with a solution. And I think for me in consulting, and I hear it in your EOD stories, is that there is something so empowering when you're in a room and you know that within that room, if they shut the door and they put a problem on the whiteboard and we all get together and roll up sleeves, we could figure just about anything out. And it's weird, like you wouldn't, like if we took a criteria at the door and checked off like what we needed, we might not have all the boxes checked. But when you get in the room with a bunch of people with the right attitude, mindset, and they kind of go through, and I felt that in the military. I hear it in your stories. And so a long way of kind of setting up is like one career is, get out and go do a new career outside the military. The pros and cons. The pro, you're not into a fixed hierarchy of officers, enlisted, admirals, generals, et cetera. You strip all that away because you go into an industry far away from the military that doesn't fully understand that. In that setting, you're a veteran and you're honored and you bring stuff to the table. So that's one side. And the other side, civil service is an easier move because, in that situation, the pro is very easy transition because of your rank and different level and expertise. You can, through kind of a meritocracy, you can get charted into exactly what job you could do at what level, and you know what to expect. And it's safe and it's dependable. The cons are the pay isn't commensurate with a new career. But the risk is a lot lower. And because, like you said at the very beginning of this, the military is an institution. It's, and so people get comfortable in institutional settings where I can go, I remember being in Pearl Harbor and, I knew that I can go down if we're in port and not out under the water somewhere, but I can go down and get a meal for breakfast and get something at lunch and get something for dinner. If I got a little crazy spending, I always had a place to stay. So that institutional part, and I had a bunch of people that really cared about me as a person. And you get into that mode and it's hard to break. But so that's very attractive. The last mode that I see was contracting back. And, you and I have talked about this, and this is something that you've done. Like when you got out, it's like anybody that listens to this episode realizes how much of a specialized skill you have. And you can make that transition to contract that back into the military. Again, pros, the job. A lot of times you even know the people. You're comfortable. The con is they still see you as that person that you were before you left. And sometimes it's hard to break the parameters. I remember when I got out of the Navy and the first time, like I wanted to take an executive role, and I'd worked my way up and I was a pretty hot runner, younger guy. Like the people were like, no, this is Troy. He's the nice young man. He's not the boss. And so you get into these stereotypes. So talk a little bit about what your mindset was. And even right now, just share with the audience, like where are you at? And because I'm sure a lot of veterans are at this point when they transition.
So a lot of veterans, including myself, struggle with trying to translate and having cups of coffee or informational interviews, people like you, sometimes you find out like, oh, that's what you guys call it. And then you replace the military term with what civilians call it. So you can start speaking the same language. There's definitely a language barrier for most military and some civilian. There's they see the movies, right? They think that you're going to come in, you're going to be that drill instructor that they see, and it's like, oh, we're not all like that, it's, or they're like, oh, well, we need self-starters, we need people who can do things on their own, and it's like, well, we do that because we don't always have someone there telling us what to do. We have commander's intent, and I mean, all those times I was in Fallujah, I didn't have someone there telling me what to do. I knew what I was trained to do and what the problem was and how to solve the problem as safely as possible. But it's a struggle, right? Like it takes effort to understand a different language. And that's probably why I don't speak another language, because it's hard. And for most people, that's where the hardness starts, so it doesn't happen. So to translate someone's military experience to go, oh, hey, you could do that here at my company, it's hard. And the only way you have that happen is having cups of coffee and having one-on-ones with people. And I mean, I purposely try to find people. It's like, you don't know anybody in the military? Oh, I would love to have a cup of coffee with you and just talk about what it is you do, so they can understand what I do. And then they go, oh, wow, you guys do the same thing we do. I was like, yeah, we don't always jump out of planes and dive and shoot things. And I was like, there's the whole administrative side as well, too.
Yeah. Todd, as you kind of get ready to kind of close this out, I think about maybe different types of messages that you might want to leave with the listeners. I know at the very end of your MBA process, this is something I think is super valuable, and I don't think it's unique to USC, but, they'll ask you, hey, what is one thing you want to leave behind? What's one thing you want to kind of do as you kind of go on? You've basically laid out a couple things like that, but I don't know if that would be something you would end on here, but what would be some points that you think would be helpful to a veteran that's out there, and maybe a message to industry people to get through, to have a better understanding and how they can help veterans?
I would say both sides need to. I mean, you have to make the effort, right? You have to show up, and it's a mindset for everybody, and everybody shows up to work. They want to get something accomplished. Same with the military. Everybody shows up to work, wants to get something accomplished. So showing up and wanting to just be better than you were yesterday, whether that be meet a veteran, talk to them, learn more about what veteran or military life is like and how that relates to, say, a company or a role, because a lot of military have identical roles as in the civilian sector, commercial sector. And just realizing that it's not always like what the movies are. I mean, probably just take my war story out of it. I'm one of the oddities. That's not everybody's experience. And for the veterans, I mean, what is it? Yogi Berra said, come to a fork in the road, take it. Sure, the safe thing, contracting, you could totally do it. And you'll always have a job. I can tell you from personally, I've looked at jobs. I've gone through it and went, oh, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And when I get to how much the job is, like, rated on, say, LinkedIn, I disqualify myself. I was like, oh, I can't make that much money. What makes me think I can go do that? And of course, I've had enough training over my career that catch myself, and I go, what am I saying? Don't say that. Like, that's fear. Like, that's me being scared to go do something different. And if you don't ever do anything different, you don't grow. You don't grow as an individual. You don't have opportunity. Maybe you're not good at it, but you'll never know if you don't ever try. And everybody just needs, like, in the military guys, like, they want to be comfortable. Like, they go to it because they're comfortable. They try to go out into the civilian world and get jobs, and it's they may say they have a veteran program, but it's like, okay, how many veterans are you hiring? Like, and are you really hiring veterans? And in my instance, I get people like, oh, yeah, we want to hire veterans. I have this entry-level job for you. And I'm like, I just got a master's from USC. I don't think I don't think that's the right place for me. And the one gentleman I spoke to on that issue, I was like, that might be why you're having a high turnover. You're misplacing your talent pool. But mindset. What would I want to leave someone with? Wake up every day and just try to be a better version of yourself. Try to leave the world better than you found it.
Yeah, Todd, I think that's awesome advice. And, I really appreciated our discussion today. And I think that our listeners will find so much value and wisdom in what you've said. So thank you for coming up here and joining me today in the studio. I really wish you the very best. We'll continue to do this transition together.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.